You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss what we've learned. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Jody.
Hi, how are you? Feeling just fine. How are you? Is there usually a question?
I don't know.
I think we'd have learned by now.
Ah, there you go. Today's episode focuses on what we have learned about Shadowdark after running it for nearly 3 years. So, Jody, let's both go to the table. Why don't you kick us off?
Oh, thank you, sir. So after running this lovely, lovely game for a little while, I found myself reflecting on that experience and what can I bring to a discussion about. So what have I figured out? What truths have revealed themselves? And it took me back to kind of early on. I'd been running a long-standing 5e campaign, and it was an long extension from the Lost Minds of Phandelver, and I was really just burned out on DMing 5th edition. Still love the game, just wasn't able to find the mojo to get behind the screen, as it were. So I wanted to pivot to Shadowdark. So I set about converting my group's existing 5e characters and porting them over to Shadowdark. Now, it was a heavy lift. It required a lot of thought and time by my players and then me and back and forth. But once we were done, we did come to the table and finished our campaign in grand fashion with 2 epic sessions. The heroes sieged a castle. They attempted to rescue a dragon and face down a greater demon. It was the stuff of legend. Now, while the game was a blast and the campaign did meet a satisfying conclusion, it was clear throughout that process that the characters in their Shadowdark forms simply didn't match up to their 5e counterparts in feeling heroic. And I just realized Shadowdark's its own vibe, and the stories that we tell at our table have to match that vibe. And to me, it all began with understanding at that point how important class abilities, your core stats, and your character's background are within your Shadowdark setting.
And for me, I'm going to take us back to the first time I ever ran Shadowdark, which was just before the Kickstarter, or right as it was launching. I ran an old school Essentials adventure that is called Barrow of the Bone Blackguards, which I actually highly recommend. I ran it for a group of great humans at your house, Jody, and I did my usual thing with the system that I do with almost any system that I run. I read it, maybe some heavy air quotes over read it, and watched a few people talk about it on YouTube, and then I just kind of ran it by the seat of my pants. And I probably messed a lot of stuff up. In fact, I continue to do that even today. But one thing I definitely did wrong was I made a ruling on a PC's turn undead roll, specifically the level restriction associated with destroying undead when they fail by 10 or more. However, no one probably remembers that rules error, but if they do remember that moment, and actually this was your wife's character, Jody, they probably remember your wife's lone priest PC wading into a room of chanting and singing and sort of jubilant skeletons and turning some of them and blasting others to smithereens. So I don't know what that says as far as takeaways, but it definitely has stayed with me as a sort of duality of getting rules wrong and learning from those mistakes, but also what happens when you maybe deviate from the rules and make a call as a GM. All right, Jody, so let us gather around the fire for our 50th episode.
It's insane.
50th! 5-0, baby. We made it. And we're going to gather around the fire to talk about all the various things we've learned. Let's try and cover as much ground as we can. And let's kick this off with actually something we talked about last ep. And so I don't know that we need to really spend a ton of time digging into it, but we should kind of talk about what we've learned about luck tokens. And I want to let you kind of set the table here, so to speak, because luck tokens are something that lots of people in the community talk about, have opinions about, have changed, homebrewed, house ruled, etc. So what have you learned? And by extension, what have we learned about luck tokens? And where are you specifically at in terms of the way you're dealing with them?
Wow. What I've learned about luck tokens is, my goodness, are they mechanically important? When I first came to Shadowdark, I was like, oh, that's neat. I really like that. Like I loved inspiration in 5e. I thought it was a cool mechanic, a little bit unnecessary because you have so many ways to do that, but it was so cool. And was loved that it came over the years now of running Shadowdark, since, as you pointed out in your intro, both of us started running it with the Kickstarter, effectively running and playing like, hey, this seems great. I want to do this. And off we went. And I didn't appreciate initially how powerful luck tokens were and how important to a system that can be swingy and is gritty the ability to re-roll a die is. So that's kind of like my top level takeaway is, whoa, they're important. You need, like, I need to have clear opinions about them. One of my big takeaways is actually, and I just very recently kind of came to this point, is if you are conflicted about luck tokens, I genuinely think there is only one non-challenging answer around luck tokens, and it is you start every game by giving every player one luck token, and that's it, and that's the end of luck tokens. Other than, of course, you cast Bless, or you have a Bard, or the other mechanical ways they would show up. But you remove any other discussion around them from the game. It is either a character ability creates them, or you just give them to everybody. Anything that is not that is going to be challenging. I suppose if you wanted to get real gritty, you could go, the only way to get luck tokens is via a Bless spell or a Bard or something like that. If you're okay with cycling through lots of low-level characters, do that. But outside of that, man, they are a fickle thing. Where am I at with them now? I am currently trying to run as much as possible rules as written with them in terms of doling them out. And what I have realized is I hate being the arbiter of what is or isn't worth a luck token. I really want to continue to try and do that and find a good middle ground, but I am very aware that it is unsatisfying for players to not be sure why they would get a luck token, because they are so powerful. That unsurety and the players wanting to go, well, can I play towards a luck token?
Yeah,
it is a reasonable want. That's not a power gamey thing in a deadly game, which Shadowdark can be, though not as deadly as the internet would have you believe.
We'll get there in a moment.
Gosh, you need an answer. So where I'm at right now, in a more concrete functional sense, you get one if you take downtime. You get a luck token. That's one. The other thing is, if at the table the group does something particularly synchronized or heroic as a group, or somebody forfeits their turn in a very selfless way, not a silly way or like I'm leveraging, but like I am going to go do this thing to help somebody else, and it may or may not be really optimal, but in terms of like a tactical long-minded view, that comedically, we have also I've become very vocal about, no matter how funny something is at the table, no matter how in character awesome it is, I am not giving tokens for role play, theater kid stuff, or jokes, because the people who play at my table are incredibly funny and we laugh a lot. And I enjoy that, but I would also be like shilling tokens out left and right all the time. And it encourages that behavior, which our table has no shortage of. We good. We're there. I don't need to incentivize that. So, man, this is, I think of everything we're going to talk about, this might be the thing that I am the most shaky on for myself.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm going to run down the luck token rules that I would use if I was restarting a campaign, but I think it should be mentioned that like you need to consider the other house rules or other various things that you are including. So for me, I place luck in this context. I enjoy grinder mode and deadly mode. Grinder mode means that with a successful rest, you only regain 1 stat damage per stat and HP equal to 1 roll of your hit point die, and spellcasters choose 1d4 lost spells to regain it after a successful rest. And then deadly mode is death timers are always 1, and it's a DC 18 int to stabilize. Now, I would house rule in this case that stabilizing brings you to 1 hit point. I don't like unconsciousness. So within that construct, right, I think it's important to understand I like to balance that sort of, I don't know, more gritty part of the game by starting every PC with a luck token, allowing only 1 reroll. The luck tokens can't be chained. You can share luck as long as you are within near of an ally, and we lock fumbles, meaning that you can't re-roll a natural one, but you can spend a luck token to negate the fumble or mishap. Together, those two things tend to create some amount of balance between gritty, in the muck RPG play and luck tokens as a way to kind of mitigate that. Truth be told, we play slightly differently in my Dolmenwood game. So we don't use grinder mode. We're using grinder mode in your campaign, Jody, and I love it. I really love it. And we use a slightly modified and house rule version of death timers that gets us closer to deadly mode. And so I think that would be, as far as what I've learned about luck tokens, I think they are great, but I think you need to pair them with a difficulty and challenge that is commensurate with the power that they bring. That would be what I would do is instead of knocking luck tokens down in power and not doling them out, because I have the same problem that you do, Jody. I don't like giving them out. I don't want to be the arbiter of that. Instead, I like the idea of well, let's make it more challenging on the players to like grind through rests and dungeon rounds and make death more likely, but also give them ways to mitigate those early game levels that are challenging and will be made more challenging by these game modes. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, is using luck to balance out the stuff that players are going to see maybe as a loss or like an imposed challenge. For more on luck tokens, see last episode, but let's go to, this is a nice segue into our next topic here, which is the as written. I think the thing that you and I have learned is that Shadowdark is not actually that deadly of a game, specifically because as written, the going to 0 situation becomes alarmingly not that big of a deal. During combat, if you go to 0, you wait until it is your turn. On your turn, you put out a death timer, which is a 1d4 roll plus your constitution modifier minimum of 1. On each subsequent turn, you roll a d20, and on a natural 20, you rise with 1 hit point. That means you have basically at least 2 turns, 1 to put out your death timer and 1 to roll a d20, at least 2. Before you officially die. And lots of characters are going to have multiple turns. So as written, that ability to go to 0 hit points, you do see a lot of characters ping-ponging between 1 hit point and 0 hit points, and there's no penalty for that. So Jody, what is your thought on kind of the rules as written, death timer and death mechanics, stabilizing, etc., and where are you right now? The same question.
Yeah, well, I think the important little nugget in that is the unconsciousness. Say you are stabilized, because you could also have a friend take a hard intelligence check and stabilize you, and then you are unconscious for some amount of time. What does an unconscious PC do? How do you rouse them other than magically giving them more hit points? And that is where the 0 HP bounce up and down issue comes up for me, because why is it not deadly is also something we should why do we always say that? If there is a priest in the party, which is, given something we'll talk about in a minute, is a reasonable likelihood. If there's any sort of party balance option on the table, a priest is a reasonable thing to have. And there are luck tokens in the game. The priest will have cure wounds, barring some very divergent style of play of like, I am intentionally suboptimal here.
Yeah.
Or I have been forced to have random spells or something like that, which, if that's how you roll, then obviously it's going to be more deadly. That's why it is, even if you have a neutral wisdom score, so no modifier, an 11 or better is a 50-50 shot on a D20, and you get 2 rolls at it. Statistically, you should be able to get somebody up from 0 hit points and allow them to fight on with now far more than just 1 hit point. So, yeah, this ping-ponging thing has, over time, has just become an unnecessarily like fiddly mechanic in a game that is celebrated, I think, for not having little fiddly slow us down mechanics. The pacing of I go down, and then on my next turn that it comes to me, I put out my timer, and then on my next turn I roll, and then my timer counts down, and then I modify. That isn't, like, to me, this is a vestige of Shadowdark's influences and roots more than a actual, like, this is how Shadowdark, this doesn't feel like it's the right answer for Shadowdark, is this unconscious, conscious, get up, get down thing. Arguably, those who are like, you're at 0, you're dead, that's it, and use that option, that does feel pretty Shadowdarky to me. You are maximum OSR blood and guts mode, right on, do that. Cool, love that for you. Where I'm at with it right now, I really, 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 really love our exhaustion mechanic. That is, if you go to 0, you lose a gear slot to the word exhaustion. And if you have to drop something, you have to drop something. That it just takes a slot and your gear slots are chewed up. So if you go down 3 or 4 times, you lose 3 or 4 slots until you can take some downtime or a rest, depending on, I prefer that it is downtime because I've kind of gotten pretty loose with my how much time is downtime discussion. So I'm really enjoying that stat. Or that answer. It's something we found a long time ago. I am increasingly moving away from any sort of unconsciousness thought. I'm not really seeing the benefit of that. I think right now, my definition of unconscious is as follows. You are unconscious until the conclusion of the battle. So that when once the battle is over and we are out of combat rounds and PCs are taking a break and they're gathering their wits and wiping the blood off their sword and dragging the lizard men out and prying the gem out of the giant idol's eyes. And that's what's going on. We can go over and slap Billy a few times and splash some water in his face and be like, dude, you still with us? I'm there. Cool. Get up. Fight better next time. I am okay with that if I'm staying close to rules as written. However, before we get to what you've been dabbling with.
Sure.
I have been flirting with an idea.
Oh, this is live.
Let's
do it live.
So I was recently pinged over on the Sly Flourish Discord by one of our listeners, Knight of Moon and Shadow. Shout out there. And I was pinged about a discussion that was going on around the Daggerheart death rules. And what happens in Daggerheart effectively is that when you drop, the player has a choice. And their choice is to, as I call it, trust fate. I'm using my own terms here. And you make a die roll and it's like a 50-50 and you either die or you get up with a good chunk of hit points and you just rock on. The downside is you die if you fail the roll. So that's a trade-off. Blaze of Glory is you get one more turn and your stuff works. You are at maximum power. You would have to, as the GM, figure out what you want this to look like. I would roll, I think, off the cuff. On your next turn, all your stuff is critically successful. You want to cast a spell? Good. Critical success. You want to attack somebody with your sword? Critical success. Just go. At the end of that turn, you die. No saves, no death timer, no nothing. It's just game over, die. You can't be resurrected. Blaze of Glory, it's over. Or you avoid death. And here you go unconscious, and this follows effectively the rules of going unconscious. However, you also make a con check, and if you fail, you take some sort of permanent scar and would introduce a permanent scarring table that would be some form of statistic damage that would be linked to this table, that your core stats would be affected by this impact. So it creates a choice point where there wasn't one. Now, What I'm waffling on, and having run this by my players, is this notion of these three choices are wildly outside of the vibes of OSR, and I can hear some of you listeners just
there is
immediately...
much wringing of hands and gnashing of teeth.
Yeah, there are pitchforks being lit and my name carved into the torches that will be coming for me, not in a good way. And I hear that, and that's why I haven't put it in yet. However, it also creates some great story. So if your Shadowdark game, like mine, does lean towards the more heroic side of old school play and away from the meat grinder 20 characters a session, then this isn't so weird of an idea, and it puts an interesting choice point in, and still 2 out of the 3 choices are, your character dies. So, we're still right in the middle there. I don't know. It's a thought I'm going with, but that's wildly different. You have come up with something else that we've been playing with that is punching me in the face aggressively as a player.
Yeah, it is. So I was inspired by Gels, the Shadowdark Discord's resident mathematician, and overall just boffin of the server. So I switched from using. I wanted to see how this would work, and so when we relaunched our Dormwood game in the fall. Like we do at the beginning of the school year, we take the summer off. I had some new house rules, and what I told players was that we were going to use con damage a lot more. And one of the things we use con damage for is carryover damage. In terms of if you take damage when you go to 0, what happens? There's no rule for that in the Shadowdark rules. The way that it will work here is you take that con damage, or you take that to your con, and then grinder mode and whatnot would then kick in. Now, again, we're not using grinder mode, but my preferred play style, that would be what we would do. And that creates a much longer and more old school essentials or BX like recovery system where you end up, your constitution score goes down and suddenly you need multiple days to get it back to normal. This is kicking you in the teeth, Jody, because you already had a low con, and then there's an item, a type of fungi or like an herb in Dolmenwood where you can give somebody some hit points and they get back up, but they lose some con and you lost some con.
Yeah. Didn't die.
Permanently.
Saved my life.
Yes.
My character's life, but whatever the penalty was, took the maximum penalty on a character that already had a very low con score. So we are running around at comedically low constitution.
I think
levels.
it's 3 max.
Yeah, 3 is where I'm at. I'm rocking a 3 constitution these days. Not a modifier of 3. Well, it is, in fact, if you used regular Shadowdark stuff.
So anyways, I'm using con damage as a way to deal with the bouncing up and down and just want to call out that there is an enduring wounds table in one of the curse scrolls. I don't know off the top of my head. We can look it up and maybe put it in the show notes. But I do think that there's some consideration should be given to what happens at 0 hit points, because for in my opinion, unconsciousness is just like not interesting and not fun. That's my personal opinion, and again, if your table loves it, then rock on with your bad self. So next, I'm going to talk in relation to this. Let's talk about hit points. And my goodness, there are so many different ways to generate characters, specifically stats and hit points. I mean, stats. There's one for every table. It feels like.
Right.
But let's talk about hit points and starting hit points. And rolling hit points. I want to frame this as a what have you learned, and that's the kind of overall vibe of the show. But like we have both started with kind of rolling hit points, playing rules as written, and we've moved away from that. Why, Jody? Why have both of us moved away from this? And what have you learned? And what is kind of your current incarnation of your starting hit points and, by extension, rolling stats?
So I'm going to start with what have I learned, or just where am I at, and then the why. Where I'm at is I'm not interested in rolling first level hit points at all. Like, you start with your maximum con plus go. So whatever your die is, there's your result. My reason for this is what I was seeing was a really kind of unsatisfying situation where if you allow for any sort of stat placement option, if you are not exclusively using 3d6 down the line with no modifier, and I think it's really important to note here that we don't play that way and have never played that way in terms of like our interactions or our larger shared groups. I know you've tried it a few times. And,
sure.
And back in the day, I tried it and watched it lead to, young teenagers lying. So all of this has to come under the umbrella of not going 3d6 down the line and that's your character go, because that does change a ton of things.
Yeah.
We have used for stats you have to have a 14 somewhere. So you roll an array, and as long as there's a 14 in it, that's a character. So you're going to be good at something, and then you place your stats, and it's not in a row, it's you get to place your stats. Because of that, if you were doing any sort of stat placement, it places an undue premium on the Constitution stat. Because if I have a negative there, I am dooming my character to begin with effectively 1 or 2 hit points for half of the classes in the core book, right? Thieves and wizards are both rocking a D4. If I have a negative con in that stat, I am most likely starting with 1 hit point. I am statistically likely to do that. So that whole thing is it's just unsatisfying. It's an undue tax to one of the stats that frankly gives very little benefit elsewhere other than monster attacks that poison you. Your con stat just isn't going to come up that much. You don't get those hit points at later levels. You're not penalized on future class rolls by level. So it's this very weird one-off point of, hey, this one stat's super important at the point you make your character, and then it's not ever. So I'd rather just say, you know what? Hey, you're going to get your full hit points to start and then rock and roll from there. And then having a lousy con score really stinks when you do get hit by one of those poison monsters and you really notice it, and it becomes another option for a dump stat, which is probably not a great idea. But it is. I mean, instead of just every character who can be stupid is stupid, and every person who can be not charismatic is not charismatic, and that you can have these kind of sickly folks out there trying their best to get by in the world. And I think that for me is where I'm at and why I'm at just take your hit points and go. Also, I would like to get to a point where we are telling a story and cycling through a new character every week. When we had Mike Shea on the show, we talked a little bit about that of like, man, I really funneled story into the one character who stuck around because the only one who stuck around. Well, that's avoidable. And it doesn't totally lopside going, hey, you start with 4 hit points, wizard. Guess what? They're still super fragile. They get hit with a D6. It's a 50% chance they go down. So I don't know. I just see the benefit of it is huge, and I don't see the drawback other than like just desperately clinging to some nostalgic style of play.
Yeah, so this is actually one of the reasons that I wanted to try con as like a method for. Let me start from the standpoint of what I've learned. I have learned that Constitution is an undervalued stat in many ways, as is Wisdom, by the way. Like, you need to actually work to make Wisdom good unless you're a priest, or not good, but useful. But for the purposes of this discussion, I was seeing con exactly the way you were, that it was important at level 1 and then was of minimal importance later. And so this is why I like the idea of con as a solution to lots of different things, because if you take damage to your con, it incentivizes you to put a high score in your Constitution. Now, I want to push back on the story element, because I actually think that there's a couple of things that I'm not sure about, and there's a couple of things that I am sure about. I don't really care about max hit points at first level for the story purposes. I do it because it's easy and because it's one fewer die roll and it's one less step. And frankly, like you said, it's not that big of a deal, and it doesn't really hamper very many classes, very many ancestries, because dwarves just get a +2 bonus right from the start, so you don't get to roll with advantage one time. Boo frickety hoo.
You still got the max.
Right. However, there is a method for rolling hit points that I really like, and I heard about this again through Gels, and I have been thinking about trying this, where you do roll your hit points, but you re-roll every hit point die every single level. And you either have as many hit points as you roll if that number is higher than your previous hit point total. And if it is lower than your previous hit point total, you just get 1 hit point. And what that does to me is it means that it smooths out the curve across time, and it ensures that like your con score and your con modifier sticks around throughout, but like you're never going to be stuck with that, that 1 hit point you rolled at the beginning. It's just not going to bog you down. And we've seen this, by the way. We have a fighter in our Dolmenwood game that literally, I think she is level 7 or 8 and has like 19 hit points or 18 hit points. And that might even be overselling it. It is not many.
Right.
And that's just because it's been like 1s, 2s, and 3s on hit point rolls. And eventually, that actually starts to undermine the situation. When we started Dolmenwood, we used a house rule where you rolled your hit points and you couldn't end up with anything lower than half of your hit point die rounded up. So long story short, I agree with you on the story element, but I think there are other reasons. And for me, it's just like simplicity. Players like it. It's not that big of a deal. It doesn't actually make characters that much more survivable, but it does privilege, making sure that you care about Constitution a little bit, and I have added this con damage thing to kind of make a Constitution a little bit more important. But of course, as far as rolling stats goes, I like the roll 3d6 down the line and swap 2. That's but I haven't really tried it. That would be my preferred way to go there. I like the array. I think it works fine, and it's worked for us for like 3 years. So I don't see why we change it now.
Yeah, I'm of the mind of, and I know, and I don't disagree even with you roll your stats to find out who your character is.
Yeah.
I get that. There are a lot of players who don't think that's fun. Like, full stop. There are a lot of players who the notion of being told this is what you're going to play because this is what you rolled one time on your stats, so that's what you need to play. And I can hear the people going, well, you can play whatever you want. If you rolled a 5 intelligence, no, you're not going to play a wizard. That would suck. That would be not fun. So you're going to play something else where the stats were more aligned to it. And I'm like, I personally, Jody is perfectly happy to play that game and be a player in a game like that. I would have a great time. I know enough of my players fully would reject that I'm like, and why not? Like, we're here to play out a fantasy on some level, and I'm pretty anti-power gaming, but like, I want my character, if I've got a fighter, I'd like them to be good at fighting. If I have a priest, I would like them to be able to heal people. So yeah, you got a stat that'll, at least one of your stats will get you to do the thing you should be good at. Again, stylistically, I'm cool as a player either way. If you are trying to create not a like hyper bespoke experience around like meat grinding old school, then I just don't understand really why 3D6 down the line has a ton of appeal.
It has a lot of inertia. And to be fair, our players would play that way if that was the way we were going to play. We just know they wouldn't enjoy it, and it would not be the experience that they were looking for.
Something I've learned here, though, as we're talking stats and rolling stats, that I want to throw in here is, is the reaction table an important part of Shadowdark, and something I was not using initially and am using now. And the comedy of charisma is not a dump stat when you start using the reaction table. We have a player who loves to talk to NPCs. It is, I think, maybe her favorite thing other than taking notes about the world. And she dump stats charisma pretty regularly. And then hilarity ensues as she, as a very likable, very kind-hearted person, has these characters that constantly get treated with, at best, indifference to their kindness. Is wonderful. And I think that is one of those, like, what have we learned? And if we're talking stats and stuff, charisma is not a dump stat if you start using that reaction table.
Yeah, I mean, this player ostensibly fumbles her charisma check every time she interacts. Not anymore though. Has a good charisma on her current character now after some long-standing role-playing and storytelling elements. But I digress. Speaking of fumbles, we talked a little bit about mishaps on our last episode, but fumbles in general. Fumbles actually are rules as written. That fumbles exist. They are not called fumbles. They're just called critical failures. And I think a lot of people miss this in the rules. I know I certainly did the first time, but on page 78, natural 20, natural 1. They are listed there. When you roll a d20 and the die shows a 1, what you're doing fails maximally to maximum capacity. An attack roll might automatically miss or even strike an ally. So this leaves it up. This is very nebulous, right? And whereas natural 20s and criticals are much more codified, specifically for spellcasting and attack rolls. But I think I'm going to start this off because what I have learned about fumbles is they are very hard to make fun, but they are fun. I have not figured out a good way to use them for GM fumble, like monster fumbles. I don't think either of us use natural 1 monster fumbles. We really only use the kind of core mechanics of spell mishaps and critical successes, critical hits, and critical successes on spellcasting rolls, and then natural 1s for attack rolls. We have implemented a fairly minimal penalty, but one that has potentially pretty large ramifications. I'm more lukewarm on this than you are. I think you like it, but why don't you kind of dive into what we adopted early and what has persisted, especially for you?
Yeah. So the fumble rule that we've adopted is if you're making a melee or ranged attack, the weapon you are using to do that, if you roll a natural 1, takes a permanent -1 to its damage roll, minimum 1. Can't zero out your damage. It is a blunted blade or bent or slight crack to the arrow or crossbow. The reason I don't mind it is there is a chance that mathematically this could pile up to a massive thing at some point. In fact, the session we ran on Saturday, it did take a toll, but really it's another money tax is really why I like it so much. It is a way that players have to spend money. It also creates an interesting a thing I like of if you create something like a masterworked weapon, it's not a magical weapon. We've also ruled this doesn't apply to magic weapons. They're impervious. They last forever. They're, of elven make or some coolness. Yeah. But if somebody has hey, you have this bow that gives you +1 to hit. It's not magical. It's just incredibly well made. It's made just for you. You spent a ton of money on it, and it's, you found this master craftsman. It can still break. So it's a financial thing that I really enjoy, actually, the money of it. And I like the narrative of in my backpack, as we had the other day, of like, I have a sharp dagger and I have a crappy dagger and I have a blunted axe and I have that we got to that point as a thing that was really fun was at the end of that session on Saturday, you guys were telling me of like, dude, my backpack's empty. I used all my gear and half of it's broken. And, and there's a 1 for wizards, and you can see our whole past episode about wizards and spellcasting, about the fumbles and how important those are. It's a little tiny texture piece, and as a -1, I guess it could pile up and be a real problem where your weapon isn't able to do damage, but it's small enough and resolved quickly enough that I enjoy it.
We do rule that the weapon always does at least 1 damage. At least that's how we ruled it. But to me, fumbles are one of those strange things. I like them. I think they probably need to be in the game to some degree, especially if you have spell mishaps and penance and stuff like that for spellcasters. It seems correct that, but they are one of those things that's not codified in the rules. And so I always find it very hard to find a fumble, especially for like a melee attack that isn't you trip and fall down. That is something that I'm I'm pretty decent at improvising random crap on the fly. It's something that I think I'm pretty good at. Fumbles just flummox me to no end because I am imposing a penalty on a player, and unless I like the -1 damage, but I don't always want to do that. And sometimes you roll a natural 1 on a dexterity check to climb something that's very slippery and you're not a thief, et cetera, right? Like, what happens then? Do you fall to your death? Like, it always feels very GM fiat to me, and what I have learned is that I just don't like that. But I also don't want to get a fumble table and have to get out a fumble table when it happens, because they happen infrequently enough. Maybe 1 or 2 a session, at least in terms of when I would need to reference like a fumble table. I don't know. This is the thing that I have not figured out. It kind of drives me nuts. And it drives me nuts also because as a GM, I want my monsters to be able to fumble, but it's just one more thing that I don't have an answer for, so I just kind of hand wave it. I don't know. I would love to hear people's solutions and things to fumbles that are maybe more procedural, maybe more rote, because it's just one of those things. I like rolling dice. I'm much more, I don't know much more, but I'm more procedural than you are, Jody. And so I would be happy to have a list of 6 things, or be able to, have something that is in addition to this weapon damage, because not every natural 1 happens on weapon damage.
Right. And you get a free attack, or they get a free attack at you, or they move, or once you codify it, then that's what it does.
Well, as
you said, the GM fiat point, I think, is a sticking point for both of us, is if you fumbled and it's my call what maximally fail means, then I'm getting to choose. It's me choosing to punish you. It's not the GM no, the monster is behaving in a reasonable way for the monster to behave. Right. No. This is me as God's hand coming down and punishing you.
Yeah.
You rolled badly, so now I'm going to scold you for rolling badly. And I think that's the rub that both of us are going man, I don't want that on me. I don't want to have to make that call about is this or is this not worth whatever.
Well, let's go from something we don't feel confident I'll speak for myself, something I don't feel confident in, to probably the biggest mea culpa that and an argument for running systems, rules as written, the XP system in Shadowdark. Both you and I took a look at the XP system in Shadowdark and said, oh, no, thank you.
Yep.
And I went and, I was like, Jody, we're going to do gold as XP. It's going to be great. I ran a long time old school essentials game for my sister online. And I used gold as experience, and it was awesome, and I loved it, and I definitely didn't run it rules as written then, so this whole thing is kind of built on a house of lies.
I played back in BX days, and it was an AD&D, and it was gold as XP then, and it was great, and loved it then. And
you know what? Like, on paper, gold as experience drives the loop. It drives the gameplay loop. It means that there's a discrete number that you have an experience, and et cetera, et cetera. And so we started playing gold as experience, and actually not too long ago, probably 6 months ago, maybe right around there, we basically both were like, the XP system in Shadowdark is excellent, and we were totally wrong.
Yeah, in the very early days of Shadowdark, post first Kickstarter, kind of before it had become, I think it's fair to say what it is now of known and backed. Yeah.
I don't know. In its way.
Yeah. That, there were a bunch of people chatting about it on the Facebook page at the time. And there was, just a lot of opinions, as there are around these sorts of things. And at some point, Kelsey did chime in on the communication and said something to the effect of, yes, effectively every XP system is kind of arbitrary. There is a point of arbitrariness to, you place the dungeon in the treasure and they do or don't find it, or other way around, you put the treasure in the dungeon. That's where that goes.
Wait. Great idea for a dungeon.
I think so. Quick, 1 minute, got to write this down. Scribble. Yeah. So, and she kind of was like, this is mine. And in a weird way, it's so not tangible. You recover treasure, question mark on that, rules as written, but you recover the treasure and you get the XP, and it's 1, 2, 3, 5, whatever it may be, XP.
No 5.
And then bloop, you get your XP and you move on because you got your treasure and you're good to go. It's not really any different. And for what's funny is, for me, Matt, I don't know if this is landing for you, the fumble thing feels like this weird GME fiat thing of like, man, I don't want to narrate that you fell down and you get stomped on, or it gets a free swing at you, or your shield goes flying across the room because apparently for a second you forgot how to hold on to a weapon. This of, you have recovered some treasure, here's XP right now, okay, moving on, doesn't ever feel GM fiat-y. It feels, in fact, I'm a little, my only drawback of it is 2, I didn't start it sooner, and second, I want my players to be like, is that worth something? Like, I actually would wish they would do it, so I would start getting better about remembering. It's just so simple, so clean, so good. And the divorcing XP from the value of the treasure, chef's kiss. It's a mundane treasure. It's a really nice one. It's a legendary one. Wipe hands, move on.
Yeah, I mean, you can still attach kind of gold value approximations and whatever but long story short, what I like about it and the way that we run it is you get the XP immediately on find. I think it's totally reasonable to award it at the end of the session, or even award it when the PCs recover the items and then bring them back to town. The reason I like to just award it at the moment is because there's so much less bookkeeping, and it's just so much cleaner. I hate it. It is fun for a little while. It is fun to track gold and experience and add up the numbers and see the numbers get bigger and then divvy it up and see how much experience everybody got. Blah blah blah. It also meant that, I think in the games we were running, they were wildly unbalanced in terms of converting treasure from other systems. Now, yes, you probably do need gold values for treasure and various things from, like, an old school Essentials or BX module, for instance. But in terms of XP, sure, you can try and use a gold value to XP, but you can also just make a call of this is a normal treasure, a fabulous treasure, legendary treasure, and assign the XP in that way. And you can divorce it a little bit from gold piece value if you so choose. I think what I appreciate about the system and what I didn't really see in the system is specifically just the cleanliness of being able to award on find and awarding it to everyone. This is the other big thing, is that you're not divvying up experience. You're not doing all this math. No one has to get out their phone to get out a calculator, which is it's just the worst. And I really like it. And it's an example of, I think, the validity in people saying, hey, you should run the system as written. And so the other thing that goes along with treasure, though, and the other thing that if you're going to recover treasure, you got to have a place to put it, is slots. And this is another thing that I see some folks want to make easier for their players. We talked about hit points and making things easier from level 1, not necessarily in our experience being a huge deal. Boy, howdy, if you make it easier for players to carry equipment, I have found that undermines fundamentally the game. And I have become much more rigid about slots. In fact, any magic item these days takes a slot. If it's a ring, no, it takes a slot. Even if you put it on, and Kelsey has chimed in on this, and I think it's super important that anytime you recover it's certainly something that's worth XP, it takes a slot. And undermining that system, I don't know what you've inevitably found the same thing, I think. But
100%. I think in terms of if the vibe of this show is what have we learned, you cannot put enough importance on the gear slot system, that it is the whip on the other end of the carrot of finding the treasure is, hey, you got to be able to carry it. It has also become really interesting to me, the interplay when we look at XP between coin awards and item awards.
Yeah.
Yes, if we find a magic short sword, we get the XP and it's a cool find and we figure out who it's best in the hands of and we give it to that person right on. And then we get back to town and we have to pay for our lodging and downtime. Oh no, we do not want to sell this sword.
No.
Uh-oh, what do we do? Oh, we found 100 silver coins. That's rad. Is it rad? Because it's taken a slot and it's not worth a ton of money. And it's good, but is it great? Oh no. And those interactions that are happening when a ring takes a magic slot. One of my characters in the Dolmenwood game has a bracelet that allows me to talk to plants. That's awesome and questionably useful for a guy who only has at any given time 5 or 6 slots. So it's not that bad. He's very weak though.
You haven't really used that very much. What's going on there?
I've been trying to find all kinds of other ways to cause problems and stay alive. So far, I haven't found a way yet for the trees to tell me how to have more constitution. Anyway, I don't want to belabor the point, but that was one of the what did I learn about the slots and treasure and XP is that the treasure relationship to the slots is much more interesting when it's divested from XP. So,
yeah.
A lot of this is like play it rules as written, but there's some underlying stuff that seems kind of important that at first pass through, maybe I didn't really see. And it was the play that revealed it.
Well, I think, slots as written, it's somewhat unclear what does and doesn't take a slot. It's also important to note that slots are an abstracted form of carrying capacity, right? It's based on your strength, but it's not really about how heavy or bulky an item is. It's just items take slots. And anything that you make free to carry is inevitably, you are foregoing a choice. Right? You are basically taking a choice out of the hands of a player, and that player is probably going to be happy that they don't have to make that choice because now they can carry 2 things.
We didn't talk about it earlier, but
sure.
The HP drop to 0, bounce back, unconsciousness. If there's no unconsciousness, it takes how many slots is it to carry somebody, which is not a fun conversation. It is a tedious mechanical thing.
Totally.
It's a narratively cool imagination point. It is a tedious work through at the table.
How do we get this guy out of the dungeon?
Yeah, is not a fun.
No,
it's not a fun thing. Yeah, so that's another layer of this. How do these things interact? Matt, you've got an interesting one here that I don't even know in the show notes entirely what this means.
Yeah.
So level restrictions.
Yeah.
What's your axe to grind here?
So we didn't talk about this in the spellcasting episode. But I love level restrictions on abilities because I think, again, this is something you don't realize until you've played Shadowdark a lot, that Kelsey put a lot of effort and energy into levels of monsters and levels of just things that aren't monsters, humanoids and whatever. And the level restrictions on spells are keyed to very specific breakpoints of monsters. And I really appreciate the fact that there are certain spells that literally cannot target monsters that are above a particular level. For 2 reasons. Number one, it means that sleep isn't just able to be an encounter ender for monsters above a certain level. It means that monster levels are important outside the context of just being a way for GMs to kind of understand how and what to put an encounter or how to put an encounter together. And additionally, and the thing that I love the most is that it allows for spells to do slightly similar things, but at different tiers, they affect different levels. So I'm thinking of Hold Person and Hold Monster, for instance. Hold Person has some additional restrictions, humanoid, etc., but it's a level 4 monster or less. Hold Monster is any level, but above 9, you have to make a opposed roll. So what I like about that is it disaggregates spells. It's a way to make spells in particular, but also just any abilities. You can gate them. You can make sure that they aren't. You can make them super, super powerful Charm Person, for instance, but they aren't so powerful that they can just break the game. You can introduce new and interesting challenges that aren't going to get undermined by a spell that they've had literally since they made their character.
Oh, yeah, I'm loving them and have loved them. This for me is this was always rad.
Oh, well, look at you. You're very smart, Jody.
Look at me.
You're very wise.
Well, what happened on Friday that I don't know if you're aware of is some feral centaurs attacked our party who are, I don't know what level each one of them was. But the player to my right, who tends not to be hyper tactical minded, leaned over and said, "Do you think they're level such and such?" And I watched somebody else across the table saw the conversation happen and was like giving the what level do you think they are? And then another effect went off and we saw their hit points get to a certain point and everyone went, and both of them nodded and I was like, yeah, those aren't going to work. And they were like, okay, cool. And they started going back to looking at other spells because it was like, if that thing's got that many hit points, it's not level. Yeah, because sleep isn't going to work.
We record hit points up, right?
Yeah.
So we how much damage have you done? And it was like, still up and also at 20. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You mentioned in that though, and I think this is our closeout item, is having solutions for a problem. And something you've just introduced is, as you kind of mentioned, gating certain abilities behind certain levels and allowing them only to happen at a certain point. And there's a natural kind of vibe to Shadowdark about when and how power thresholds are reached.
Sure.
There are still tiers of play in addition to tiers of spells. There are tiers of play of, first through third and then fourth through, fifth, sixth. And as the wizards hit their big thresholds of going nuclear,
it's always this damn wizard.
Yeah, they're the meters of where we're at. But another thing you have listed here is where do magic items fit into that puzzle? Oh my gosh.
I feel so strongly about this, Jody.
Yeah.
And I the one thing that I will say that I think I have done in this long-term campaign, this Dolmenwood game, that has saved me from more than anything else. I've made a bunch of mistakes with house rules and stuff like that. Like, we tried a bunch of stuff, but the thing that has saved me is a fairly low number of magic items and no ability to purchase any magic items of any kind from anyone. You must go into the dangerous place and pay the price of risk in order to find magic items. And I feel very strongly that any Shadowdark game, I'm not talking about play style. I'm talking about the system itself is just undermined by being able to buy even something as mundane as a healing potion, because it takes away often class niches from other places, and it's just frankly it undermines a core assumption that the rules make that yes, you can ignore, but I do think that at a certain point it will come back to bite you in a way that is not fixable unless you start house ruling and taking away magic items. And this is why I really like the random treasure tables. And I have learned to embrace the random treasure tables because they do have very powerful things, but they are also tiered based on however you want to use them, monster level, character level, etc. Usually it's character level, but I like to use monster level as the way to kind of tier those things. But regardless, if you're just rolling up a dungeon, you want to be careful about magic items because they should be special. They should be precious. And they should be, I think, interesting. I have not found that magic items that have like a massive drawback to use are particularly fun. I know a lot of people really like the magic items where when you use it, you have to take a big penalty or whatever. It's not my jam, but I know there's enough people out there who have had success with those that they must be interesting and fun. But buying magic items, it really grinds my gears. Anyways.
No, we're totally in agreement here. Even like you said, I'm glad you said the healing potion thing. Even like scrolls and healing potions. These aren't things you can just go pick up at the store. Otherwise, everybody would be doing it. The other piece that you mentioned in that I think is really important is magic items also should be mysterious.
Yes.
So detect magic gives you general properties.
Yes.
So you guys found a sword in my game recently.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And it was like, oh, well, no, it's definitely for war and greed. And the trait that is from the random traits table is it makes you eat gems. And you found somebody that would tell you, like, they knew the sword and they were like, oh, here's what it does. And they were able to tell you that. And that was a reward for finishing the dungeon, was that you got to be told exactly what that item does. You have other items that you think you know what they do, and you feel
we for sure know what they
definitely
do,
know what they do. But that little bit, and there's a lot of little bits like this in Shadowdark that are worth noticing, of that 3 rounds of focusing on not identify, but detect magic, because there is a forthcoming identification spell.
Indeed there is.
That detecting, after 3 rounds, you get the general properties. There is clearly a want, and Kelsey's been pretty vocal about this, I think, out in the worlds, that like magic is supposed to be mysterious. That is a want of Shadowdark. And not only does you cannot go to a shop and buy magic items, and they are kind of unknowable. That intersection is interesting. And when the world works that way, I can say both as a player and GM, it makes the world very exciting. That we have characters in Dolmenwood that are actively hiding magic items.
Yeah.
That I have a character who has I think the best weapon we've ever seen. And I took the character off the table, also for other reasons that are not as good, but that, like, because he had this item, he was like, yeah, I'm not letting anybody else get near this thing. I'm going to go hide it. You used it
without knowing what it did and found out. And when I watched your head explode.
Yeah. Was very, and have another item that we still don't know what it does, except it's super bad. And somebody has just quietly been trucking around with it and does not want to draw attention. And then in the game I'm running, a very similar thing with a book happened, of like, hey, we don't want to take this item into this dungeon. Can we give it to one of the other characters who's not going, to keep it safe? All of this has to do with magic items are mysterious. You can't go to shops and buy them. And as a GM, you can have a lot of fun with keeping them that way.
Yeah, I love that. I love the mysteriousness of magic items, but I also think it's reasonable for there to be people who can tell you, as somebody who knows the lineage of the sword and can tell you exactly what it does, or a magician or a wizard who can cast identify proper on the thing. Sure, that's great, but that should be something that players have to quest for gold or for an item to do a favor for this wizard or whatever. That sort of stuff is what makes the world feel lived in, real, etc. It makes magic feel mysterious. So, speaking of mysterious, I bet you, dear listener, are wondering what is the sponsor of today's episode? And let me tell you right after this. Folks, the sponsor of today's episode is none other than Hench Recruiter. One of the things I've learned, Jody, about Shadowdark is that henchmen don't really belong in the game, but they do belong in your life, dear listener. And Hench Recruiter is the smartest way to fire. Finding good hirelings and retainers is hard these days, and you never know who is going to show up, and more importantly, if they'll be sober. Well, Hench Recruiter has you covered and can confidently find torchbearers, trap finders, or accountants, or audio producers with thousands of competitive resumes that they sift through. Jody, you have been on the lookout, apropos, for a guard or a scout of sorts. Tell me about your experience working with Hench Recruiter to find someone like that.
Dude, have you ever seen Caddyshack? Do you know how tough it is to get rid of gophers? So I was out there weekend after weekend looking at my lawn, and there's mound after mound, and I can't find the things. And I got stuff to do that isn't monitor my lawn, but I got to have my lawn looking right, I tell you what. So I went to Hench Recruiter, and they set me up with this fella. Man, Timmy and his 10-foot pole work wonders. Not only did he keep a lookout, he poked that little sucker back in the ground so fast, my lawn's never looked better. Thanks, Hench Recruiter.
When you sign up for Hench Recruiter, they will post signage around your town of choosing, and most parties end up finding a match in just one day. You can find your Timmy in no time. Exploring dungeons, looking for treasure, or keeping your lawn looking poppin' is only getting more complicated and more competitive these days. So if you want to find the most valuable treasures or be your neighborhood's belle of the lawn, you need Hench Recruiter. Use the code DMD when signing up and you'll get 20% off your first town posting. That's Hench Recruiter, the smartest way to fire. All right, Jody, let us bring this topic into the light with our core takeaways. Start us off.
All right. I want you to go out there and run the best Shadowdark game you can for your table. But to do that, you need to go to the rule book and think of the optional rules not as optional, but as a menu to choose from. And I think that is genuinely good advice that I can say I have learned from this. It's not that they're optional or add-ons or changes. They will create an experience.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole rule book is essentially optional, Jody. There we go.
I love that.
You gotta. Yeah, those game modes are great. And on that same note, try stuff. Try house rules, try things, but communicate those things with your players and let them know that they might change. You know, I'm going to once again bring up Gels, who is a fan of posting this lovely gif of Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus. Make mistakes, get dirty. You know, just look, folks, try stuff. It is a game. We're planning to have fun. Try and figure out how to play the game that you want to play. And that sometimes means making some mistakes.
My last one is going to be this. And Matt and I are huge fans in all over the place of rules light games where those rules that are light also sing a much greater song than they would individually of their pieces. However, when you're dealing with a rules light game with Shadowdark, that means there's going to be a lot of interconnectivity between rules. That is not something I fully appreciated or understood where those connection points are. And I'm still learning. I just know now that I have to be careful when I'm looking at luck, hit points, stats, etc. The way those things interact are going to ripple because there's so few of them. So just be careful if you're poking around in there, but do poke around.
Yeah. I mean, we're kind of telling the same story here, Jody, but I want to go with my last one is there are no sacred cows. There are very few sacred cows. But those interconnected systems means that you should understand the system before you start to make a big changes. And the last thing that we didn't really talk about in here that is a learning that I think I want to end with is just make sure that you protect class niches, because this is one of those interconnected systems where everybody has a role to play, and if you start muddying those waters, players start feeling less capable.
All right, friends, as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you can email us at dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can also reach out via YouTube or Facebook, but best of all, get at us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadowdark Discord channel. You can find links to those feeds or any of the other materials we referenced in this episode's show notes. Until next time, try something new.
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production and is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadowdark RPG is a part of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023.